Ultra-processed food accounts for more than 50% of our energy intake, and it's an even bigger problem in children. So it accounts for about 65% of our energy intake for children. This is actually increasing at an alarming rate.
I'm Gavin Freeborn, and this is Original Ideas from the University of Liverpool. Across the series, we explore the world of academic research, how it shapes our future, and the impact it has on society. We look at the latest research taking place and meet the people behind it. In this episode, we're looking at environments, relationships, behaviours, and everything connected to food.
5 minutes of junk food advertising results in children consuming 130 extra calories a day, researchers say. The study found advertising and marketing across platforms such as social media, TV and podcasts all had a similar effect.
As a nation, our relationship with food is complex. There are many different health and cost of living challenges connected to food, yet there are also opportunities to educate and live a better, healthier life through our food choices. Here in Liverpool, research has shown that children who view just 5 minutes of junk food advertising will consume significantly more calories across the day. However, that's just one part of the story. Our own environment can also shape the way we eat. So let's explore what we know about our relationship with food and how research can help us. I met with Professor Emma Boyland, Professor Charlotte Hardman and Dr. Rebecca Evans from the University of Liverpool to find out more. Emma, Charlotte and Rebecca, or Becky, thanks for joining us in the studio. Before we begin, could you briefly tell us about your background and your area of research? Charlotte.
Sure. Hi. So my name's Charlotte Hardman. I'm a Professor of Psychology of Eating Behaviour here at the University of Liverpool. As a psychologist, I'm interested in the individual level factors that influence our eating behaviour. So these would be things like our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, our values, our social and wider cultural practices. What's really important to understand about eating is that it's a complex behaviour. It's not just about fueling a need for calories. And lots of people can have problems with their eating, and that can lead to health issues. So if we can understand the psychology and the factors that influence people's eating, that can help us to develop strategies to help people manage this.
Thank you. Emma?
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Emma Boyland, Professor of Food Marketing and Child Health in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Liverpool. My research, as the name suggests, focuses mostly on food marketing. So trying to understand where foods are marketed, what sorts of foods and drinks are being promoted, how they get that persuasive message across to convince us that we should be buying their products, and also the influence on eating behaviour. So how does it influence what we eat and how much we eat and so on. And part of that is about how do we get at some of the marketing that's happening that's perhaps not so obvious. So, for example, what's being digitally delivered to young people in a personalised, targeted way on their digital devices. So some of the work has been about kind of trying to tap into methods that we can use to explore some of that, and also use all of this information to inform policymakers of how to do better to protect young people and everyone's diet in the UK.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Becky?
Hi, so I'm Dr. Becky Evans. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Psychology. So my research, I guess, is like broadly environmental influences on eating behaviour. So for my PhD, I was looking at food marketing on video game live streaming platforms. So specifically like the extent and nature of the marketing and then impacts on adolescents' eating behaviour. And then more recently, as part of my postdoctoral role, I've been looking at different nutrition labelling strategies. So on packaged products and then also on menus. So for example, things like high in salt labels on menus to see if that helps people make healthier food choices. But usually it's from the kind of public health policy perspective. So trying to inform policies that can be implemented to improve diet.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, what do we mean when we talk about food environments in the UK and where we are as a country?
Well, when we say food environment, we really mean the context in which people acquire, prepare and consume food. So perhaps the most obvious example is the physical context. So what food outlets are available, what sorts of foods do they sell, how easy is that to access, and so on. But there are also other things. So as we've already mentioned, food is a very sort of emotional and culturally relevant topic. So there are kind of socio-cultural influences over the types of things we might choose to eat as well. And there is also political context and economic context that layers onto that as well. So the term food environment is really a catch-all for all of that stuff that influences how we go about buying and consuming foods.
I think something to add about our food environment is it often isn't sort of in the interests of our health. So as we go about our daily lives, particularly in urban areas like cities, we don't have to go very far before we are reminded that there's unhealthy food available. So it might be we go past tasty takeaway, or we see a big billboard or an advert on a bus shelter. So we're constantly being reminded about the availability of tasty foods, but these are the sorts of foods that we shouldn't be eating every day. These are the sorts of foods we should be eating in moderation. And we know that our brain is very responsive to these sorts of reminders. So in scientific language, we would call these food cues. So we're constantly being cued and reminded, and we know our brain, particularly reward areas in our brain, get quite excited about this. And then we're always having to sort of exert control. So, we might see a sort of tasty fast food advert, and then that might make us want that food, but then we're kind of having to exert this self-control. And that can get quite tiring. And when we're tired or stressed, actually our self-control is less effective. So it's really sort of how we interact with our food environment, but constantly being reminded about the presence of unhealthy foods is a real sort of strong trigger for a lot of people to crave those foods or go on to eat them.
And Becky, have you got anything to add from your research in terms of digital environments?
Yeah, so I think one interesting thing is how the two can interact. So for example, if you're like a young person walking home from school and you're near like a food outlet, how they can then sort of ping you and send you notifications that might then make you think, oh, well, I'll go and pick up that burger, I'm nearby, and that's prompted me to think about it. So I think that's one thing, just thinking about how the two interact. And then, I guess just considering the online environment in particular and how varied that can be. So social media, all these different platforms, although they're under the same umbrella term, can be very different. So if I'm thinking about my research looking at video game live streaming platforms, they're quite a sort of unique environment where you have this social element, this gaming element, and that presents real opportunities for food brands to, I guess, engage these audiences and advertise their products in really unique ways as well.
And I suppose environments are only part of the story. Do we know why different people are affected by their environments when it comes to food choices, but others aren't?
So I think I'd say that everybody is affected by their environment, but in different ways. So I think it sort of links to what I just said earlier about the availability of sort of unhealthy foods in our environment, and some people might be able to, that can create urges and impulses to go and want to eat those foods, and some people are able to control that, others aren't. But also the extent to which we might able to exert self-control also changes within individuals depending on how we're feeling. So if we're tired, if we're stressed, I think a lot of people can sort of relate to that feeling, as you just want something nice, you want something quick to sort of cheer you up. So we know that people use foods in lots of different ways, but we're all inherently different. So we are going to respond to environments in different ways. We have different beliefs, different values around food. We also know that genetics is very important in a way. So our body weight, for example, is quite strongly controlled by our genes. Some people are just put on weight more easily than others. I think many of us will know there's annoying people who seem to be able to eat anything and get away with it, but we are inherently different in terms of our genetic makeup, but then our genes can also impact on how we respond to food, and genes can determine, for example, how strongly our brain reacts to the presence of food-related images in the environment, that sort of thing. So I think it's a very complex picture.
And what do we know about the impact of the advertising in food, fast food and takeaway giants that use every form of media for advertising, are they becoming more responsible?
I wouldn't say that, no. I think what's happening is that a lot of policymakers across the world, so the UK government, but also many others, are starting to recognise that food marketing is one of many important factors that govern the way we do. And they're starting to move on policies to restrict the actions of the food industry and the marketing industry as well. So they're being forced to act differently. They're being forced to, for example, be bringing in some regulations. From October, in theory, there's an agreement, but actually in January in the UK to restrict unhealthy food advertising on TV before 9 p.m. and paid for advertising online. And so those companies will be forced to adhere to this mandatory national regulation. But increasingly, there are a number of additional new ways that food marketers can access consumers and influence them. And as soon as we call it a squeezed balloon, as soon as you exert pressure in one part of that system, it moves elsewhere and kind of bulges out somewhere else. So part of what we'll be doing as these regulations change is look at where is the marketing going and how effective have those regulations been in really reducing people's exposure. And particularly in the digital environment, it's very difficult to get a hold of that and to really make meaningful restrictions. And some of the work Becky has done has spoken to just how many ways there are that particularly young people can be exposed to this sort of harmful food marketing.
And along with the advertising, there's some really interesting connections between food choices and social media, even gaming, as you mentioned earlier. Can you tell us any more about that?
Yeah, so we know that when young people, so children and adolescents, see food marketing in social media and gaming, it can influence a whole hierarchy of like knock-on behaviours and effects. So they'll remember the advert, they'll have more positive attitudes towards that particular food or that brand that's being advertised. They might go on to then buy it or ask their parents to. They'll consume it, and then this will have like longer term health impacts such as weight gain, in the very long term cardiovascular disease. So we know that this happens. And some of my research has found this specifically on video game live streaming platforms. So in case anyone's not too familiar with how these platforms work, you'll essentially go in, you'll pick a streamer who is a person who plays a video game or a specific game that you like. You'll click on that and you'll be essentially watching their gameplay, but also their sort of physical environment as well. So for brands, they can integrate like product placement. So the streamer might have, for example, a branded fridge in the background or be wearing branded merchandise. There's also overlaid adverts, so little images for certain food brands. But I think because there's this kind of community feel and there's opportunity to interact directly with the streamer and other people watching via like a live chat, this kind of ties into, particularly for young people and adolescents, this need to sort of belong and sort of assimilate behaviours that you're seeing. So with like food and gaming in particular, you have this like strong culture of like drinking energy drinks, eating unhealthy snack foods to kind of power your gameplay, make you perform better. And I think, as I've said, as an adolescent, you're particularly vulnerable to, I guess, wanting to belong. And brands have noticed this. And it's this very unique environment where you have all these sort of interacting factors which make it a very powerful place for brands to advertise.
Can you think of a few examples of healthy, natural food initiatives that are going on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are some really nice examples that we see here in Liverpool, for example. So one approach is to really focus on production and thinking about where is our food coming from. So there are quite a lot of organisations in Liverpool that are involved in growing food. And we're not talking just about allotments here. We're talking about growing food in community spaces for everyone, or growing in urban farms using technology, vertical farming, that sort of thing. So it's all about trying to produce food locally, closer to people, that is more nutritious, and then looking at how we can get that food into communities that need it. We also have social businesses who are very involved again in supporting people who aren't able to access foods, providing communities with things like slow cookers, supporting people to start using slow cookers, and also supporting people to access healthy, affordable sort of meal bundles so that actually everybody can access good food. So, yeah, I think there's great work going on. It's really just about how can we do more of it and how can we make sure that all of these excellent initiatives are appropriately funded.
And turning back to research, have we seen any positive gains or changes that have been made thanks to research in the area of food consumption? You mentioned earlier about the new policy. Are there any other areas that are improving?
I mean, I think the sort of big exciting topic at the moment are the new obesity drugs. So there's some of the injections that we're seeing, so Ozempic, they're called skinny jabs in the media, which is a really horrible term, but that might be the sort of term that people are more familiar with. So these drugs target a hormone called GLP-1, which is a satiety hormone, so it helps us to feel fuller after eating. So the clinical trial results are really impressive, and in fact some of that research has been done by Professor John Wilding here at University of Liverpool. Yeah, it's exciting, but we just need to be aware that there's never going to be a magic bullet. So I think drugs can be used alongside other approaches, but for people who are managing their weight, the behavioural aspect is really important as well. So a drug's never going to be a magic bullet. So I think while there is a lot of media excitement about it, and we can understand why, it needs to be sort of in the context of all the other changes that we need in order to help people to consume healthy diet. And that includes change at the individual level. So there are going to need to be changes at the behavioural level that people can maintain over time, but then also changes to the food environment and policy changes, which Emma and Becky's research speaks to nicely.
And with the GLP-1s, it seems interesting because they work on satiation.
Yeah.
But some people are also seem to be reporting that they feel like any sort of addictive tendencies they have, that these seem to help with that. Food being one, but other things like gambling or things like this.
Yeah, so often people are using food sort of to fulfill an emotional need. That's a very common experience that people have, particularly people who've struggled with managing eating and weight. So yes, that can happen if sort of the eating sort of becomes less fulfilling because you just feel fuller more quickly. Then I guess people need another way of sort of managing that emotional distress. So that's sort of where we need to, taking this sort of bigger picture approach and understanding the emotional and psychological aspects of food consumption. Because if we just focus on trying to change people's diet, potentially we're just treating a consequence and not a cause. So it's really about trying to understand what are the psychological determinants of that behaviour. Because if that's not treated, then as you say, people are just going to transfer onto something else.
Yeah, very interesting. And based on your research, what one thing would you like us to consider more, and what should we be thinking about?
I think we need to be thinking more dramatically and moving more quickly. That's very easy to say and very difficult to do in sort of government terms, but there have been a number of very well evidenced policies put forward and shown that, if we did this would be much more effective, and so many of them haven't actually been taken up. So I think it's time to stop, as Charlotte says, looking for that magic bullet, really, and start looking at what do we already know is going to make a difference and actually do it. I think there's been a lot of talking and not enough action. But returning to your question also about, what has research informed, I think there have been lots of actions at both the local level as well as the national level. So I mentioned the UK government are doing something about food marketing. They're also looking at things like price promotions, buy one, get one free offers that politically has been very challenging to get through because there's this idea that it's supporting people who are, maybe struggling to afford foods. But actually what it's doing is leading people to purchase 2 lots of something and then consume both when ordinarily they would have only consumed one. So it's actually kind of contributing to an excess consumption. And you often see those deals on the less healthy foods versus the healthy ones. But we've also seen other national things like the sugar levy being applied to soft drinks, and that's likely going to be expanded potentially to milk-based drinks as well. And that makes a massive difference because what that does is direct people towards healthier options in a way that doesn't involve people kind of actively changing, their thought processes, and also drives reformulation so that you can choose the same beverage and it actually be healthier for you than it was a few years previously. But also local level actions. So Liverpool Council have enacted a policy to restrict food advertising in the outdoor streetscape. You know, some local councils are looking at restricting opening new fast food outlets in the vicinity and things like that. So there are lots of actions being taken, but lots more we could do.
And on that note, something that's often mentioned is food deserts, which I guess relates to the geographic work that our colleague Mark does, working alongside you. I guess maybe someone can explain maybe about what food deserts are. Obviously, you're the experts, and potentially let us know about the Queen of Greens project, which relates very nicely to that.
Yeah, so food deserts are areas where it's very, very difficult to acquire healthy, affordable foods. So these might be urban areas, for example, where there are no large supermarkets. There might be sort of small convenience stores, which tend to be more expensive for a start and will often sell a lot of packaged, processed food, confectionery, crisps, that sort of thing, freezer food, with very limited, if any, fresh produce. So for people who are living in those sorts of areas, particularly people whose mobility might be limited, there might be health issues or lack of transport, then there is very little option available. Cost is really, really important. You know, we're coming out of a cost of living crisis. It is expensive to consume a healthy diet. It takes time to consume. There's often more preparation. So it's quite understandable that actually the healthy diet it's just not affordable or obtainable or achievable for a significant proportion of the population. And the Food Foundation put out quite a lot of statistics about this. So people on the lowest income would need to spend a really significant proportion of their disposable income on food if they were to achieve government recommendations. So it's just not achievable. So I think the Queen of Greens is a really nice example of local action. And, you know, Emma has already mentioned some great things that are going on in Liverpool, and Queen of Greens is another. Actually, in Liverpool, we have some of the worst food deserts, or in the Liverpool City region, some of the worst food deserts in the UK. And the Queen of Greens is going into those food desert areas. So it's a mobile greengrocer. So it's basically taking fresh produce to communities who otherwise would not be able to access this sort of food. And community members can also use vouchers on the bus. So these might be Healthy Start vouchers, which is the government's scheme to support families with young children. Or they might use vouchers from charities such as Alexandra Rose Charity. So it's a really nice example of a joined up intervention that addresses both accessibility and affordability, very well used in Liverpool, and lots of opportunities for how we might scale up this sort of approach and for it to be adopted in other areas.
Definitely. Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for coming to speak with us today. It's been fascinating to hear about your research. We look forward to keeping an eye on your progress going forward.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Hi, I'm Mark Green. I'm Professor of Health Geography at the University of Liverpool. Places shape a lot of our dietary choices in ways that we don't always think so obvious. A lot of the research that we've done has investigated how the features of neighbourhoods, such as living in an area with lots of fast food outlets, and how that might make dietary choices promoting things that are maybe high in fat, salt or sugar, just by being in those areas where those foods are more accessible. We've also been looking at people who live in areas where there's more food being advertised, and in particular unhealthy food advertised, and how that nudges people towards different dietary choices as well.
You're listening to Original Ideas from the University of Liverpool, and that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode looking at how the research is shaping our relationship with food. Thank you again to Professor Emma Boyland, Professor Charlotte Hardman and Dr. Rebecca Evans for joining us to talk through their work. If you've enjoyed listening, please do check out some of the other episodes from the series. We've looked at topics such as AI.
We really see the AI tools working side by side with the humans who are going to be deploying them.
The importance of clean air.
The levels in the playground were maybe 20 times the guideline levels for health. Levels in the kitchen were sky high, 100 times higher.
And research taking place around children's rights.
She said, "Mommy, I can't believe how anyone can film children when they are dying." It really stuck in my head.
head to liverpool.ac.uk/research, where you can also sign up to our monthly research newsletter with updates on events, opportunities to work with us, and much more. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.